get started on tonight's lesson, and I'm going to, if you haven't already hit the got it portion, please do. Remember, we record, so you don't have to. It's all living on the back end. And Jim's lesson last week, you remember he gave us homework, and it was show some sparks of appreciation to 6 people in the next week. And if you don't get out much, it can be to your family members or spouse. And the whole thing with that was being intentional and remembering that it's up to us to take that action. You know, we can't put it on someone else. And I had the good fortune to actually get back out in the public a little bit. I did a trade show that wasn't really going to be on my radar. And so I was dealing with people for an entire day. And it dawned on me there were 2 things that really hit me. Number one is I really like people. I do. I like people. I like interacting with them one at a time. I like learning parts of their story. It's fun. People are cool. And at the same point in time, I get to the point where I hate people. You know, I just don't want to be around them anymore. And I think that's the dichotomy of who we are as our own social creatures. We have to find that sweet spot. Where are we comfortable in getting out? And I always considered myself an introvert, and I've always been in careers and jobs and occupations that require me to be outgoing, exuberant, sales, that sort of thing. And yet I still consider myself to be an introvert. And I think number one, let's just get rid of the labels and say, hey, we're just all people. We're on our own journey. So that brings me to tonight's lesson. So I'm going to dive in here, and I'm hoping we're going to have plenty of time at the end here for some Q&A. Tonight's lesson, the value is coach. And the topic is boldness versus obnoxious. To be bold versus to be obnoxious. And I asked myself, I said, why on earth did we put this in there? You know, why is this part of the curriculum? What's going on here? And the reason being is just what I started talking about. We have to be bold. If we're going to be successful in whatever we do, we have to be bold. And we've talked about this prior when we were talking about confidence. And when you have confidence, it gives you boldness. And you can cross that line. People can cross that line inadvertently or personality-wise of going from bold to being obnoxious. And I think we all know what I'm talking about here. We get that image of the used car salesman. And although that's cliche, and it's too easy to pass that one off, because they tend to be pushy and all that kind of stuff. I've run into a lot more obnoxious people than car salesmen, and a lot of them professional. And the obnoxious part of it can be, we'll talk more about that. I'm going to back up just a quick second here. I wanted to start this because I no longer get the newspaper. I was a newspaper reader for over 30 years, front to back every day. And sometimes multiple papers, obviously. And I stopped a couple of years ago because it was just too negative, and I was done with it. But my granddaughter took on a paper route this summer. So she's been bringing me papers. So now I'm obligated to read them. And last week, I opened the paper, and again, I read them front to back, everything in there, and including Ann Landers. And so here's where we're going to start with this topic tonight. Dear Annie, my husband recently got promoted to CEO of the company he works for. At first, we were all so excited for him. In the last 2 months, he has seemed to become almost arrogant toward us. He just complains at the dinner table about how no one can do the job as good as him. Not really sure where this arrogance came from. What do I do to help him slow his roll? Married to an ego man. And I'm not going to give you her advice, because she said basically sit his butt down, talk to him and say, hey, this isn't working for us. But, you know, that's the issue here. And the wife hit the nail on the head. It's ego. And I started thinking about it, and it's like, you know, you have to have enough ego to handle yourself and go forward, to get to that point of confidence, to get to that point of boldness. But if you let the ego override all that, you're in troubled waters. And I just found it so interesting that here's somebody who's dealing with this at the personal level. And so lesson number one is, this lesson isn't just for business. This lesson is also for personal, it's for your clients, it's for if you're reaching out to investors, business partners, associates, you're going to have to be able to navigate some of this territory, and just being aware of it is part of that. And diving into this is like, okay, why this? And I hit on this quite often, because we've had people say, well, what does that have to do with being an entrepreneur? What does this have to do with business? And so I do breakfast with a guy who's a business consultant. I do breakfast with him a few times a month on Saturdays. His name is Morris Shechtman, and he wrote a couple of books. His latest was Fifth Wave Leadership. And one of the things he says here is, to get ahead and become better at our work, people used to acquire new skills and knowledge. Teachers went back to school for advanced degrees, business people signed up for training, doctors attended conferences, et cetera. I mean, there's continuing education in all kinds of different fields, which is all good. But the notion was that if you could only obtain this cutting edge skill or this critical new area of knowledge, then you would be the ones to greatly influence the effectiveness and the career prospects. Well, it's not all skills and knowledge, he goes on to say. They've ceased to be important. It's not that they've ceased to be important, it's that they're now just the ante to play the game. In the fifth wave, we're moving from the age of information and communication to an era of self-knowledge. The data and skills you've gained are only useful to the extent that you know who you are and where you want to go. Without that self-knowledge, all the information in the world won't do you much good. The fifth wave challenge for both individuals and organizations is to connect the knowledge to self-growth. And that's where this lesson comes in. This self-growth is so important in everything that we do as entrepreneurs. You've got to be pushing the envelope, and you can never be satisfied, not just with your business stuff, but you can't be satisfied with where you are personally. You've got to push yourself in your relationships, in your ability to say, these are my weaknesses, these are my strengths. I'm going to work on my strengths, but I'm also going to be at least acknowledging those weaknesses and seeing what I can do to rub the edges off a little bit. So here's my next point. Our job here at Young Entrepreneur Syndicate, for Jim and I, our job is to influence people to take action they wouldn't take on their own. That's our job. Your job is to influence people to take action they wouldn't take on their own. Okay? So if we can help influence you to do something you wouldn't normally do, so that you can go out there and influence other people to do something they wouldn't normally do, we're all going to be successful. That's a bold statement. Okay? If you're not changing and growing and becoming a better, more successful version of yourself, it won't be for lack of training. And that's bold. I know that's bold. Bold is confident. Bold is self-assured. It's belief in self or the product you sell or the service that you're offering. And you have to trust in the benefit to the client or the customer. You have to believe in what you're doing, what you're offering, that it's going to make a difference. That's boldness. Now, crossing that line to obnoxious. Obnoxious is arrogant. Arrogant is ego. Ego trips end in power trips. I think we've all known people, worked for people, had customers, clients. If you've ever worked in retail or the service industry, you know who they are and what happens. Everything is about them. And it's not just employers and managers that have to worry about this. You know, again, when you're dealing with associates, clients, staff, if you have to report to someone else, there's always that potential for a power trip. And that's always an edgy thing that you've got to navigate, you know, because you've got to make friends, but at some point, where do you draw the line so you're not sacrificing your own personal integrity? And that's something you've got to figure out. So I'm going to tell you a quick story, just because I was on a drive with my wife today, and we were talking. She said, well, what are you going to be talking about tonight? What's your topic? And I told her, and I said, you know, it reminds me of the time. So here's the story. This wasn't even going to be part of this, but it's so good. My wife was driving to an appointment out of town, you know, but just out of town in a little community called Whitefish, which is kind of, you know, I don't want to say uppity community, but yeah, okay, we'll call it that. It's got its own flavor, all right? And the local policeman has somebody pulled over on the side of the road, actually two cars pulled over, and my wife is driving by and he waves at her and points to the side of the road. He literally pulls her over while he's on another traffic stop. And so she stops, rolls the window down. He comes walking over and he says, "You were speeding in my town. You were speeding in my town." Now, keep in mind, he didn't even have a radar gun. So there was no, when he wrote the ticket out, there was no, this is how much you were going over or anything. He just thought she was going too fast by the looks of things. And so he pulled her over and he was very arrogant. He was very obnoxious. The whole thing, you're speeding in my town, that whole ego thing, a power trip thing. And I think we've all seen that. We know that happens. And it's not just in law enforcement. The kids who got picked on in school, who decided to, get a badge so that they could be tough and take it out on the world now. There's enough of that. But it happens in every field. Those folks are everywhere. So my wife was boiling inside. She reminded me again, she said, "I was so mad. I was biting my tongue." She just wanted to lash out and just start, well, how do you know I was speeding, and doing the whole thing. But she just took the ticket, said, "What do I have to do?" Go to court. They have a night court in Whitefish where the judge adjudicates, from the bench, all these things. So you can spiel your story, and he makes a ruling. So needless to say, my wife and I, a couple weeks later, went to night court for date night. That was our date night. We went out to dinner and then we went to night court. And we sat there, and it was the most entertaining thing we have ever done for free that you could imagine. I mean, there were parents there who were saying that the cops were wrong for arresting their kid for minor in possession because the beer was in his backpack, right? On his back, but in a backpack. So he didn't have possession of it. Like he didn't have a beer open in his hand. So why did they arrest him for minor in possession? Needless to say, he also stole the beer from a convenience store. So it was just funny. It's just the entitlement thing. But we had an absolutely great night. And the young man who was just traveling through town, and he was smoking a joint in the alley right behind the police station. And he told the judge, he says, "Well, Judge, if I'd have known that it was a police station, I would have gone over to the park to get high." And the judge says, "Well, Mr. Johnson, you just made yourself a bunch of bad decisions." And this guy was so entertaining. The whole courtroom was laughing. So my wife, the ticket was actually, removed as long as she didn't get another ticket in their town in the next 60 days. So it didn't go on the record or anything, but we had an absolute blast. So she could have responded negatively, escalated the situation. We could have bitched and moaned and complained and just said, "Oh, we'll write pay the check and be done with it." But we went through the process, and it turned out to be a learning experience, an entertainment experience, and a growth experience. And we learned so much about people, the community, the judge, and how they do the court system up there. So it's just kind of fun to, play with those different scenarios. How are you going to respond? And it gets back to the last time I spoke to y'all, is when you're squeezed, what comes out. But again, we have to dial back our own ego sometime. We can't be that person that escalates or crosses that line. So again, we're always looking in the mirror of ourselves. What responsibility do we have in this? So again, I'm going to go back to Maurice Sheckman and his book, but in his first book, it was called Working Without a Net. And this was another one of those national New York Times bestsellers. He describes intimidation, and this is where I'm talking about people who get bold and arrogant and in your face, the intimidation factor. He describes it this way. He said, bombastic, fear-inducing bosses, and he's talking about this in the workplace, of course, earn reputations for thriving on conflict. In fact, they're terrified by it and try to stomp it out with their heavy-handed ways. If intimidators really embraced conflict, he goes on to say, they wouldn't threaten their people to the point that they are afraid to voice a new or a different opinion. So in the next section, that's called a sense of superiority and arrogance. And keep in mind, I should have said, Maurice Sheckman is also a psychotherapist. Okay, not just a best-selling author and a business consultant, but he's a psychotherapist, so he can go deep. But he says that he discusses these individuals as having an underlying fear of not being able to maintain their success. They use arrogance and superiority to create distance and ward off invisible challengers. And if you think about that, that's true. And anybody, I decided I'm going to do this tonight. If anybody on this call who's been on one of the prior ones that I've talked about, because I brought this up more than once, I brought this a formula. Whenever you've got trouble at work, I had a little formula for you. Blank blank equals blank and blank. Okay. If anybody can remember what that is, I'm going to give you a free Young Entrepreneur Syndicate journal. Okay. Writing journal. If anyone can remember what that is. All right. Don't be flipping through your notes while I'm talking though. Okay. So I think though, that it's not just they've got an underlying fear of being dethroned, basically. I think there are a couple of other possibilities, and I'm no psychotherapist, but I think that people can be miserable and just like sharing their miserableness, right? The crab syndrome. You put a crab in a bucket and it'll get out. You want to keep the crab in the bucket, throw another crab in. As soon as one starts getting out, the other one will pull it back down. So some people just like misery. They might have old baggage. Number two, they don't know better. Maybe they just had bad role models. Maybe they never had a mentor. Maybe no one ever told them they were an ass. You know, sometimes people just need to be told, you know, your behavior sucks. You know, maybe you ought to try a different tactic. Sometimes they just don't know better. And I think number three, and this is the one that scares me most, is entitled. You know, like the parent with the kid. Well, why did you cite him? You know, the beer was in his backpack. He didn't have possession. There's just this entitlement mentality. And that's what was at the heart of that. If you heard the whole disposition in the courtroom, you'd understood it was definitely an entitlement thing. So there can be all these different triggers. So when you run into this friction, okay, that's a clue. When you run into that friction, always go a little bit deeper. Try and figure out what is the real source, what's really going on here. Because if you can figure that out, you can move on to the important stuff or stay on the important stuff. Don't allow other people or their behavior to sidetrack you from your goals and from your missions. It's bad enough to have a bad day and ruin sometimes your most productive hour, like I almost did to Jim today. Start off and you bring up something, an issue that you can get sideways. It takes you 15, 20 minutes to get back on track and to get your focus back. So sometimes just know what those triggers are and be able to stop them. So, and this, incidentally, in this book, I have to say, because we've talked about this before, Jim and I both, he talks about, and this was in his first book, right? In 1994, he said, there's a paradigm shift to an entrepreneurial high-risk culture. This was back in 94. He said, those companies are not looking for credentialed applicants with prestigious degrees and corporate pedigrees. There will be a shift to a more pragmatic evaluation. What skills have you acquired? This is the new pragmatic evaluation he forecasted. What skills have you acquired and what can you do specifically for us? And I know, Jim, you talked in a prior lesson about an organization that wanted to hire you and they found out you didn't have a college degree. And, all of a sudden when they looked at your work experience and what you could bring to them, all of a sudden that wasn't important, And so there has been this cultural shift. Somebody predicted this all along. So all those other things are soft skills. Your people skills, your street smarts, your savvy, your business sense, all those things are soft skills. Those aren't hard skills like a degree or a class that you've taken or something like that. That's your instinct and that's your ability to take risk. Those are the types of skills that, and remember, he said this entrepreneurial thing was what corporations were going to be looking for. So entrepreneurs aren't just individuals. Entrepreneurs can be corporations. It's a mindset. So just remember that. And when you're aligning yourself with suppliers and other people to be around, other businesses to do business with, you want to make sure that they also have that entrepreneurial attitude, that entrepreneurial spirit. Because if they don't, you're not going to mesh. It gets back to what Jim says over and over. It's got to be values. Corporate values have to align with personal values. So don't make those hard mistakes. All right, I'm getting into my fifth section here. I'm blazing through pretty quick. This is the part where you need to get your paper out and your pen. All right. We're going to talk about, this is your action item for the week. All right. I want you to do kind of a self-evaluation of how you interact with both your family, business associates. If you are in a position where you've got staff or employees, this evaluation is what I want you to look at. On one side of I want two different columns on your paper. One side is directing, title that directing, and the other side is called connecting. All right. If you're directing, you're authoritative. So that's number one, authoritative. On the opposite side, if you're connecting, it's collaborative. The team aspect. Number two, under directing, talking. Under connecting, listening. Directing, next one, top down. Under connecting, it's going to be side by side. Under directing, enlisting. And under connecting, empowering. You have a task to do, you're going to go give it to somebody. You know, I need this done. Who can do this for me? If you're empowering, you're going to be giving people the ability to rise up and do those tasks. Fine lines, but it makes a difference. Okay, next, under directing. Am I going too fast? Everybody good? Under directing, assuming. Under connecting, understanding. I just want to say ass again. You know what they say about assuming, makes an ass out of you and me, right? I wasn't going to do that, but I had to. You can't look at that word and not do that. It's just that good reminder. But assuming to understanding, okay? Next one, the directing gives answers. The connector asks questions. And under directing, it's my agenda. And under connecting, it's your agenda and our agenda. Just think about that. I want you to, this is your own cell, and no quiz, no pop quiz on this or anything, but when you have to look back at how you handled this whole week, okay? We do these on Mondays. You're going to go through the whole week. I want you to take a look at your notes at the end of the week and say, okay, how did I fall in my personal relationships, my business relationships, my client relationships with these different items? Do I need to make improvements in certain areas? Am I doing well? What can I do differently, or do you need to? Maybe you all get A pluses. Maybe that's why you're on the call. I hope so. Okay. So I'm going to end this section with a friend of mine. He's also a business partner. He was a Navy diver. He's a real estate investor, an investment connector, an angel funder. I met him in network marketing, but he also owns a couple of hemp farms, and he's big into Bitcoin and that sort of thing. So, I mean, he's a real well-rounded guy. And somebody came to him and he was asking him, he said, you know, do you want to do something on your own? And this was the guy's response. He said, I'm not the type of person to work for myself. Okay. So number one, that doesn't even resonate with me. Okay. But some people, that's their attitude. And so my friend starts thinking about this and he thought, wait a minute, what's happened here? And these were a couple of takeaways. He had a couple of paragraph response to this guy, but he said, sometimes having a stable and consistent source of income can help build a foundation, right? He said, I am, however, a huge believer that entrepreneurialism was stolen from most of us. by receiving bad financial education from family, friends, and the public school system. Any of you have read Robert Kiyosaki know that that's probably absolutely true. And he says, so what do I mean by this? Prior to the Industrial Revolution, most people did work for themselves or apprenticed, and they were always learning a new skill, and they got on from there. So he went through high school and then went into the Navy nuke program. He got some college, and he had an implanted fear of the risk of starting his own business. Just getting out. He had an innate fear because that's not what he was taught. But he pushed himself and went beyond. He says, I believe that anyone can develop a certain set of skills to be good at something. And in turn, you're more likely to enjoy it because you became good at it. And I think that's probably the most, I don't know, from a sociological, psychological standpoint, nothing can be more true. If you become good at something, you're more likely to enjoy it because you knew the effort that you put in to get there. So there are just some really cool things that, some takeaways there. And he says, you may already have the talent and aptitude to learn it quickly, or perhaps you have to work much harder than someone else. But nevertheless, your choice to develop those set of skills is not about being a certain type of person. It's about valuing your personal freedom, having choices, the freedom to fail, and the option to be tremendously successful, however you define that. So that was my takeaway. And I feel myself just lucky to be in partnership with great people, to be around people that think the way I do, but also push other people to think differently, or at least challenge their thinking. So in an age of redefining words, I want to add one thing. My final thing here tonight is I want to add another definition to entrepreneur. And if you ever look that word up in the dictionary, they usually have two definitions, but my next definition is a noun, and it's a person who is willing to invest in themselves to gain a better return on their future. And that's what I'm hoping all of you on this call are willing to do this next week. Make another investment in yourself so that you can gain a better future. And that is the first 30 minutes in, and that gives us plenty of time for some Q&A. Jim, I know you've got some thoughts on this. I want to wrap up first by saying, I started off saying it wasn't just the car salesmen that have that bad rap about being arrogant and obnoxious. And I was thinking about it. I think some of the most obnoxious encounters that I've had in my entire professional life have been in the medical field. And I don't know where that friction is. I've had some really bad run-ins with some just absolutely rude, entitled, arrogant people in the professional realm. Not so much with, lawyers also get a bad rap. I have several friends and family members that are lawyers, and I don't know. Everybody probably has their own little group of stories, but run from those people. That's my final thing. Jim, comments?
I say cut the draggers. If you got draggers like that, people bringing you down, cut the cord, distance yourself, right? You don't want to be around that. But what they do is going to bring you down. So try to be around positive people. Yeah, a few things, Rod. Great lesson. I love that you started out with our job is to help, right? And trust in the benefit of that. And there's a tremendous amount of benefit in helping others, as well as our roles here is to help you become entrepreneurs or take that next step in your career. But what I thought was the best part about what you said, Rod, is that it's our job to give you the tools. And I think throughout life, we're given those tools, whether that's from our parents, our brothers, sisters, extended family, school, experiences, jobs. Most of the tools are there already, but we need to be reminded of them and how to put them to work appropriately. Tomorrow I'm giving a big presentation to our state superintendent about school vulnerability assessments. And the first thing we do is we review school policies on the safety procedures. 99% of the schools out there have good policies, But the fact that nobody remembers them or is aware of them, that's where the downfall is in our ability to protect our children. It's just like what we've learned along the way is we have the skill set more than likely to do the things we want to do, but we've either been forgotten or we need to be reminded or just give that little bump up over the edge to be successful. So thanks for that good reminder. Great lesson. Great notes that I'm sure everybody was taking. I want to remind everybody how exciting life can be right now with the opportunities that exist out there. We're coming out of a post-COVID scenario the last couple of years and into, really a recession, regardless of what they want to say on the news. I think they're coming around to saying we're in a recession. There's so much opportunity out there right now for us to be successful and get ahead of what's happening. And I want people to realize that and be reminded of that. And what reminded me of that opportunity is some of the members in this group I mentioned last week. I was going to be on the road for 4 days, gave me a call, and I talked to a few members. One of them is developing a retail item, and she was asking about the name and the marketing and her idea. And I just listened and listened and listened. And finally I said, okay, do you want me to comment? And she's like, yeah, absolutely. I want to hear your thoughts. She was spot on. She was right on the money with everything that she presented. And she just needed that little confidence boost from a third party, which happened to be me at the time, to realize, hey, I've got a good idea here. I've got a great opportunity to be an entrepreneur in this business. And now it's just going to take the grit and determination and the patience to bring that thing to life. But here it is, an opportunity. I know there's a need out there because I've seen it firsthand. So I'm excited for that member. But to take that even a step further, I want to congratulate Will, who's on the call tonight. I'm so glad you're on the call, Will. Will launched his podcast, and it's called the Fundamental Shootist Podcast. And I'll put in the notes when I'm done talking. And what's so great about this is that this is one of the first things that Will talked about wanting to do when he joined this group. We've only been around for a few months. And today or yesterday, he launched the first few episodes, and he sent me a text, and I jumped on the shows right away. I happened to be driving around town, so it was easy for me to jump on the shows and listen. Not only did he do a good job, he's got a trailer that's 5 minutes, and he's got 3 full-length episodes of the podcast. Not only did he do a good job, but he finished what he started, and now he gets to just run the full gamut of these shows, and they're really good. The second show I listened to, called 22 LR, it's 22 Long Rifle. I learned something, and I already reached out to Will with a question about what he was teaching. I thought, how awesome is that? His first shot at this, put out a few shows, he's already got somebody interested enough to the point that I'm asking questions. Now he's got me, right? He's got a business to sell. Now he's got me. So Will, congratulations. I would really love to see everybody in this group, whether you're listening tonight or at a later date, go on Spotify. I see that it's in the notes. We'll put it up there. Fundamental Shootist Podcast. Go on Spotify, check out what he's done. Even if it's for 5 minutes or you're interested in the whole show, please check it out. And please give him a review. Okay, that's one way that we can all support his efforts, is to give him a review. Will, I still need to do that. But that will help build up his rankings on this podcast show, is by us reviewing it. And that's a way that us in this group can support one another. And by the way, when you have your own projects coming out, we all want to support, at least that's what I envision for this group, is that we support one another in our endeavors, whatever way that we feel makes the most sense for us. So again, Will, great job. I look forward to more shows. I'm going to finish listening to the shows that I started. I was like a kid in a candy store. I listened to a little bit of each one. So anyways, thank you for that. The last thing I want to say, and I'm hoping that you're thinking about your questions, is I did a big fundraiser on Saturday night, and I met a gentleman there that is in charge of, it's called Valor Equine Therapy for Veterans. And it's basically horse therapy for people that are suffering for their enlistment in the military. And, I've donated some money to those guys. I'm a big supporter of our veterans and what they've done and what they've allowed us to do in this country. And he asked me to come to their event the following morning. Granted, this is like at midnight. He's like, hey, can you show up tomorrow at 8:30 and speak? And I thought, yeah, well, it was an easy answer. Right? The answer is yes, right? But by the time I thought about it, especially the next morning, I thought, what am I going to say to these people? These people have sacrificed their lives, or they were willing to give their life for our country and our ability to be entrepreneurs. And what I realized in all this, and I won't go into a bunch of details or get on a soapbox about it, but what I realized is what an incredible opportunity we have to be entrepreneurs in this country, are to be successful business leaders, are to be great employees for the employer that works for us, that we have resources to help us be the best that we can be. And the things that these guys are dealing with, and I don't know if anybody in this group has any elements from being a veteran, but the things that these guys are dealing, and ladies, by the way, the things that they're dealing with on a daily basis, what we're doing doesn't even compare to that, right? So we talk about struggles as an entrepreneur. I mean, God, they probably wish they only had struggles that we have because of the things that they've endured. So A, I'm grateful for our veterans and people are serving first and foremost. But B, I realize how great we have it. And we live in a country filled with opportunity to be the best that we can be as entrepreneurs, business people, and employees. So it's more of a message, Rod, not so many questions, but I hope people have some great questions. And please don't forget to go follow Will.
All right. Well, I don't see any hands up, so I'm gonna tell another quick story. And you kind of reminded me of it too, Jim, because we sometimes what we can do being connectors and just being involved and knowledgeable is sometimes all that's necessary. And here's a real quick example. We do family day once a month, first Sunday of every month. All my grown children, adult children, and all the grandkids come over to my house, and whoever has birthdays that month, they get to pick whatever they want to eat and whatever they want for dessert. And my wife and I make that happen. My oldest daughter was talking about the needs that came through. She saw it on social media. We have local wildfires burning here, one big one. It's almost under control, but they sent out a list of what the firefighters needed. These people fighting wildland fire. It's tough work. I don't know if any of you have ever been on a wildfire or seen what happens. These people risk their lives too. And your talk about the veterans reminded me, first responders have a lot of other things going on. So anyway, there was a list that came out, and one of the things they needed was electrolytes, things like Gatorade and stuff like that to fuel them up so they can actually function better when they're out on the line for these just horrendous, long and arduous. I've fought fire. I know it's hard, it's brutal. And my daughter, just being a connector, she reached out to a company called Liquid IV. And I actually am a fan. I use their product. She uses it. My wife uses it. She deals with pregnant women, and that's the one that they use, that and Element, two different ones. But my daughter reached out to the company Liquid IV, and she told them that the local firefighters are in need of, the electrolytes, and she is such a fan of what, their product. Would they be able to do anything to help? And she just sent that link on. They emailed her back today and they said, we sent 10 cases. One email, one person, one email. And she managed to get, and the stuff's not, at Costco, you get 28 sticks in a little bag and it's $30, $28, something like that. This is 10 cases of that stuff. That's a pretty healthy investment. One email. Sometimes that's all it takes. One follow, one comment, one thing. Do that one thing and do it 6 times throughout the week, like Jim said last week. We don't just end this a week at a time. We get to do this again and again and again. And like 75 hard, if you only got 5 in, start over, right? Let's start over. So any other questions, comments? I don't want to waste anybody's time. If we can help you out in any way, please raise your hand or unmute yourself and speak up.
Hey, Rod, I want to throw something everybody's way while we're at it. We've got a few more minutes. So we've had a few questions come through, and Fred, you were asking a couple weeks ago about, partnerships and how do you find good partners and how do you make all that come along? And I know we were talking to some members today about that, Rod, on an email. So let's just address that for a couple minutes. All right.
Perfect.
First and foremost, it's great that we can get into partnership with friends, family, relatives, etc., because we've got a common interest. Okay, that's the fun part. And typically you're sitting around the table, you come up with a couple good ideas, and it's like, let's start a business. And I think that that's healthy. But that's the easy part. The hard part is thinking through the long-term effects of what that partnership looks like and the benefits that each partner brings to the table and why. Okay, so this is exactly why early lessons in Y.E.S, and we'll have more future lessons about this, are first and foremost, what are your values? Each partner, what are your values? What do you stand for? And share those values with one another and be honest about it. If somebody like myself, I always say my first value is God and family, right? If those are my values and my partner's values are make money and travel the world, we're going to be a little bit misaligned on our initial core values, right? Because this person's going to be chasing money and I'm going to be chasing time with my family, right? So understand what your real values are as you go into that partnership, and then take those values. We had a lesson on this, and build your goals from those values as a company. Now, maybe those are your individual values, but you come to the table with your business values and they are hypothetical. Serve the community, provide a product that provides a benefit, like Rod just said, these hydration packets, right? So you believe in good health, we're going to create a hydration packet company. And by the way, we're going to give back when we can to these firefighters. Okay. All of a sudden you've assigned some values to that company, and that gives you the opportunity to see, am I aligned with my future partner? And again, if you're honest about it, you might discover that we're not quite on the same page, or you might discover we're 100% on the same page and this is a good fit. From there, you start looking at the building blocks of that business, always searching for ways that you'll be able to collaborate or predict potential rub in the business. And rub is okay because we're all different, but it's how you manage that rub and how you deal with it up front in your founding documents, your operating agreement or your partnership agreement, or your roles and responsibilities, or your contract with the company that you've created as an executive, right? So if you can outline these things up front, then you always have the ability to go back to those founding elements and say, look, I know you want to take a month off this year, but in our founding documents, it says, look, we're going to take 1 week the first year, not until year 5 when we're profitable, are we going to take a month off. So all of a sudden you've already alleviated a potential problem. Obviously, that's just a loose example of where there might be a rub. Or if it's, I'm willing to work 12 hours a day and put my entire savings account into this business because I believe in it. And the other person says, well, I've only got 4 hours a day and $1,000 to put in, right? Clearly you're misaligned. However, that misalignment might be managed through your founding documents to say, well, first money's back, come to me because I put the most money in. And eventually your 4 hours is going to turn into this many hours and I'm going to taper back, right? But if you establish all this up front, you'll avoid those conflicts that destroy companies down the road. Trust me, it will happen. I've had 3 companies, 2 of which I lost partners in because there was a misalignment of our goals and our long-term objectives, right? And they all worked out. But I'd like to see you avoid those pitfalls. And that's why when we talk about what you bring into the business, are you evenly yoked? Is it fair? And if it isn't fair, how have you offset that unfairness? And do you have it all documented in a good operating agreement or addendums to that operating agreement or contracts as an executive back to the company? And yes, by the way, if you start a company, you should have an executive contract with your own company. It will protect you down the road if you've got investors or monies from the outside coming in. So there's a lot of little details up front. And these are the types of things that we like to teach in the syndicate here, is how you can build those foundational elements. And that really was what a lot of our initial courses were about. Even Will, if you listen to his podcast, he's doing his podcast with his dad. And I don't know what their foundation is, but hopefully they've already talked about these things. If that podcast takes off and it's monetized and they're making $1 million next year, how do they allocate those funds, right? So think about all those things. I'm happy to give you some side coaching if you need it as you start to dig into it, but you've got to have the initial element. So
I want to jump in here real quick too, Jim. You're absolutely right. And I think that's the first thing I said today was, your values have to align, right? That's number one. But number two, even if you've been in business for 8 months together and you've been doing something, this is the opportunity to say, let's review. Let's go back. You can do that anytime. Let's have a meeting. Let's take a look at what we put together. And we've got a, half a year track record under our belt. Let's review. Let's do an after actions report and see how this is working out. And start the process just like you're starting it all over. But now you've got some hindsight and a little bit of history. It's never too late to go back and review your founding documents and make changes where you need to. Remember, you're the boss. That's part of being an entrepreneur. You can change your bylaws if that's what you want to do. So it's not too late to go back. Now's the time to do that. And the second thing I will say, and Jim said this, you don't want to be unequally yoked, but you have to assign the appropriate value. Either partner, one might bring professional stuff, one might bring money. One might bring, ideas. One might be the doer, but they both have value. And without the other, neither one's going to get off the ground. So, both parties have to be equally and fairly compensated. And it's not, in the business, you guys all know, I just lost a partner. He just passed away 2 months ago, and so I get the benefit of figuring out what to do next, and that's not fun. We didn't plan for that, and if in hindsight, I would have planned for what's the process of succession here. We didn't address that. When you're young, you think you're going to live forever. So little things like that, even how is this going to go on? Is it going to go to the survivors? I mean, issues come up like that. But he was more of a silent investor, but we had an agreement that was going to shift over. We were actually going to reverse roles. And, so just know where you're headed in the short term, medium term, and the long term, but review those founding documents with an eye on your values and how those are going to align.
Yeah. By the way, there is some great documents on the syndicate in the back end under documents. So you've got what is a business plan you can refer to. You've got learning styles. That way you can kind of work through with your partner, things that you're doing. Obstacles into opportunities is another great document. Even credit basics. That's another thing that you need to decide when you're starting a business is, are we going to bootstrap this with our own money? Are we going to raise money and have investors? Or are we going to get credit based on our business? So there's all different types of ways that you can go about this. And I see that Fred's got a question. I want to be cognizant of the time. The last thing I'll say, part of those founding documents, like Rod said, he lost a partner in his business. Well, if they did their operating agreement appropriately, it would have Rod, this isn't against what you guys have done, right? But you would have a succession, like, okay, if this person passes away, your partner passes away, the business would automatically go to the spouse, right? Because it's an asset of the husband.
Yep.
Well, we've had that circumstance in companies that I dealt with attorneys before, where none of us wanted that seat to go to the spouse of the other partner. We wanted it to be open to finding the most qualified person for that job, because we all realized, hey, we have great spouses, but they're not in this business that we've started together, right? So the default wasn't to go to a spouse. The default was to go to an outside party. So there's all these little idiosyncrasies of founding documents that are important, right? So please dig into it and put as much weight and stock into your founding documents as you do the business itself and the excitement to go make money, because these things will bite you in the butt down the road. I'll turn it back to you, Rod, but go ahead, Fred.
All right. Thanks, guys. Good seeing all your faces on here again. But anyways, I wanted to say thanks, Jim, for reaching out last week. It was kind of crazy. We were trying to connect. At least I was trying to connect with you while you were on the road, and my schedule was a little hectic with travel and meetings, and it's been a whirlwind ever since I got back home. We went to the beach and we just got home. So that literally was like, you try to, we can always make time, but it didn't work out. But I appreciate you throwing that out there. I always enjoy when we get a chance to talk like that. But my question is the blank and blank equals blank and blank? I wanted to dive in on that because we have some stuff going on right now, and the communication and people that are the draggers, I guess we can call them, and dealing with these kind of situations. We have them in business, we have them in our personal lives. And Rod, I was going to see if you could go through that again, just the blank and blank, what the answer was. I don't think we got it on here.
Sure. It's on a couple of prior episodes. I'll dive in real quick because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Low self-esteem equals friction and trouble. So in other words, we can turn it around. If there's friction and trouble, it's usually low self-esteem. Somewhere, when you start drilling down, you're going to find that someone's got an axe to grind because of something else, because they don't feel adequate, or they feel like someone else is trying to be higher than them. It's the crab syndrome. But if there's friction and trouble in an organization, it's usually it's an esteem issue or an ego issue, which is the opposite side of that factor.
Okay. Yeah, because that comes up quite a bit. And I was kind of trying to formulate, like, how do you deal with that? And then, you got to be careful in how you approach the situation. You don't want to pour more gas on the fire, right?
Absolutely.
And so how do you, I always am challenged with that. I feel that challenge. I work in corporate America. I don't have a college degree, but I've had a very successful career. But I work in corporate America where I'm around people that have been to Harvard, they're from Purdue, they're from all these prestigious schools. And I've always been more of a cowboy when it comes to business. There's kind of the cowboy way. There's things that are black and white. We do things this way. We go in, we build relationships, and we get things done. These guys are operating on credentials and, this entitlement that since I spent 4 years at this fancy school that, people should naturally like me. They should want to do business with me. Whatever I'm selling, they should want to buy. And then, so you'll make a recommendation, and, maybe I read into it a little bit too much, not having a 4-year degree.
I'm going to stop right there for a second, Fred. Whoa. The self-talk that I'm hearing from you right now. I mean, you've got all the street cred and you've got the smarts, you've got it all, but you're almost talking down about yourself. I don't have a 4-year degree. I don't give a crap. And you know what? When you get to that attitude, stop thinking that way. You probably have more on them than that's that quote I just read out of this book tonight. They have nothing on you. So the confidence that you need to walk into this, I think, is the biggest thing. Your self-esteem level. Let's raise that, because you're not just on equal footing. I think you've got an edge because you're the cowboy. Yeah. To me, that has more credibility than Prada.
Yeah, right? I agree 100%. But there's a like a cloud around there that they kind of boast. And so I go the cowboy route with confidence, and it gets, like we finished out our year, and they're almost, and they haven't broke $100 million yet. I've worked for companies where we broke $100 million. I'm VP of sales and so on and so forth, but it's almost kind of frowned upon. It's like, oh, this, I'm not in the office every day, so it's a little harder to kind of build those relationships on a day-to-day basis. But it's very interesting. I've noticed that if I go in being a cowboy, most times, more than not, it doesn't really work, because they want to hear it in their own dialect and how they always operate and kind of schmoozing through their own little, world that they have created for themselves. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you that it works, and I've proved that it works, so, but it's just weird. So you kind of got to dance around this thing, and you kind of want to go in there and just be confident and do what you do, how you do it. And, it rubs people wrong. But even in personal relationships, whether it's family, even though there's a situation and you want to hold your ground, there's this, like how to approach it. I like this: low self-esteem equals friction and what, trouble.
Yep.
It's just handling the situation so that you can have, obviously you want peace and you want resolution, so people can come out of this but some people are so shallow that they can't get out of their own weakness. So they overdo it with anger, and they're holding their position, so I don't know if it talks anymore about the book, or if you have any tools to help kind of navigate through those systems, cordially.
Well, I'll say again, I'm not a psychologist, but I've got decades of experience, and I know Jim could talk about this too. We're almost out of time, and I can recommend some good books that will help. But the first thing I'll say is go back to what I talked about tonight with the connecting, and try look at two things. Number one, like Jim said, cut where you need to cut. Avoid the people that are the biggest friction causers. See if you can go around them, through them, above them, below them even, or try the connecting thing. If you can't cut them, you're going to have to try and connect with them, and that's be collaborative. Listen to them. I know you've got your own ways. Listen to them first. Figure out that way. Just side by side, empowering, understanding, ask questions, and then turn it into your and our agenda, not just yours or theirs. So, some of those little tools tonight will even help with this. But,
okay.
Sometimes they just need a good therapist, or maybe somebody just to knock them down to size. I don't know which, maybe both.
Rod, let me jump in real quick. By the way, if you need to bounce, feel free to hop off. I don't want to be on a time constraint right now with a good question from Fred. So if you feel like you got to bounce, go ahead. No offense on that. Fred, what I'm hearing a lot of they and them, and it's more about them than about you. And we all go through this, right? Because we all work in environments, or we put ourselves into environments where people they hold themselves above others. And that becomes more about them and not you, right? Especially in the work environment, because all of a sudden, they feel like they've got to prove their worth, whether that's through their degree or through other mechanisms, even down to the suit and tie they might wear to work, right? So let's make this more about you and your own success, and how you can not only, I don't want to say collaborate with them, but subtly showcase your efforts and the value that you bring to the team. And sometimes if you feel like you need to do this, sometimes it might require a little bit of extra work, and in a nice, non-emotional way. Maybe it's an email to these senior executives that hold this degree over their heads. Maybe it's an email saying, hey guys, I've had a great week. Here's my successes. Just thought I would share with you, right? So no matter what, they can't ignore what you've done in the way that you do it. Okay. You might get back to the office and you might not get a pat on the back, but deep down, regardless of their certifications and degrees, they know that you're pulling your weight, and they would be foolish to not allow you to thrive in the environment and the way that you do it. Now, the second thing I hear from this, though, and a lot of this is because I have insights to your goals and where you want to head, is that your values and your goals are misaligned with the people you're working with, right? I guarantee you, these aren't the people that you would pick first to go work with. You would be much happier starting your own business with your own culture and your own things, right? So this goes back to, as you're moving through life and you're really taking a look at what your values are and what your goals are, make sure that you're aligned, because you might not be in this situation for very long, right? Or at least where the things you don't want, and you can work towards getting the things that you do want, right? And look, I spent 12 years in a job that for half of those years, I didn't like at all. I really didn't like a lot of the people. The money was good, so I was stuck there, right? So we're all young enough where we have lots of years to get out of the situations we're in and chase the things that we really want to do for the reasons why we want to do them. So this is either a temporary thing. I don't want to call it a setback, because I know you've got a great career. And I know a lot of us that are in the same positions have great careers. We just know that we can work towards attaining something different that's a better fit for us. In the meantime, what you're seeing from these people are more about them and less about you. And as a humans, we have a tendency to allow ourselves to feed into that. I came from one of those companies at Kettle One. Everybody had a degree. Everybody knew I didn't, but
Right.
I kicked ass over there and brought them a lot of success. And I collaborated with those people in a way that they couldn't ignore me. And eventually they came to me for their needs and wants. And it was a perfect fit at that time. Right now, I eventually, decided it wasn't a good fit for me, but it was on my terms, not theirs. So I appreciate your candor and what you're going through. And I hope that, what we're bringing to you helps, get through whatever it is. And also I appreciate your candor because other people can learn from this discussion and what they're doing, whether to help get through it or to learn or not get there or what have you. So, I don't know if there's more questions or more thoughts that you want us to talk about, but I'm happy to stick on with you.
So I appreciate that. It's definitely valuable feedback. And the professional side for me isn't as big a deal. I kind of know I've been doing this long enough to kind of bob and weave through that. And between a professional career and family's a lot more difficult to, cut out the draggers, or cut them off because they're still your family. So, in business is one thing, you got to learn, it's a little easier to kind of bite your tongue and kind of work around the situation. But when you have family and there's friction and things of that nature, you've got that same scenario, but there's a little bit more vested into the scenario where it's not as easy. So, I kind of asked a pretty wide range question, but when you're going to cut the draggers on the family side, that's a little bit tougher. And you want to have open conversations and, every family is the same, right? I'm sure there's great people in your family. There's tough people in your family that have egos and what's driving it, is kind of, I think it's back to this low self-esteem. Somebody's going to rock in their boat and, they're not going to be in the limelight or have this power. Somebody's threatening them, and then it gets a little bit more sticky because it's family. Like I said, in the business stuff, I deal with it and I've had some soul searching. And I think, Jim, you nailed it. That's not where I want to be for the next, I don't want to retire there. I've got my own dreams, my own aspirations. I want to be in that driver's seat again, like I was before. That's what I enjoy. That's what I love. I want to do right by people. The family one's a little bit more sticky. So it just including in closing mine up, if you have 2 cents for that, I'd be happy to hear it. If it's, a longer.
Well, look, you just proved my point of my added comments after Rod's discussion is that's build the foundational elements in your business model, especially when you're working with friends and family, right? Because it's going to get sticky, and sometimes these things flush out later and you never know what the sticky part's going to be in the beginning, right? Because all of a sudden there it is. Bye, Jim. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Jim. See you later.
But Fred, you can make allocations for that up front, right? Like if we come to a point where there's tension and we disagree to where our business is suffering because of it, you have buyout scenarios or partnership split scenarios or leadership scenarios that you try to think of up front with a good attorney and or coaching. Rod and I, we might spitball a bunch of stuff with you, but all these things get lined up front. Okay. And when you get to where you're at now, you have a way to deal with that that's been documented. Now you're in a position where it probably didn't get laid out before. Here's what I'll say about that. And I relate it to my off-road racing. Okay. Because you're from that world. Wayne's on here. He knows that world. When I decided I wasn't going to race anymore, okay, my old racing partner, Rick Johnson, said, Jim, if you're not going to race anymore, cut the bleeding right away, because this thing will drag out for a year or more. And you're going to realize you wasted a ton of money, time, and effort the last year trying to stop what you already knew you were going to stop. Okay. So if you're having issues with a partner, and if it's a family member, you need to cut the bleeding now. And that means, sounds like having a really tough conversation with some people, and addressing the situation now, because it's not going to get better. It's not, things don't fix themselves. They don't get better. If anything, they get worse. And what you hope to do, again, especially if they're a family member or a buddy that you like, right? What you hope to do is salvage the friendship from the business, because right now, what I'm hearing you say is that, there's some tension and some rub. Well, if that continues on, eventually that's going to turn into hate and disdain and all these other things. And that relationship will be gone forever. Right. And if relationships and families are the most important thing, do the hardest thing. And that's address it now and just say, look, and it, like, obviously I don't know your whole scenario, but if it was me, I'd say, look, love you, but we're in business together and I'm having a hard time with this. We either have to work through this or decide that we have a difference of opinion and how we dissolve what we're doing now, or how we resolve through documentation so that we can get through this together. Because the worst thing that can happen is that our relationship is destroyed over a business. There's no business that's as important as a good relationship with a friend or a family member, right? So cut the bleeding, because Rick was right when he said, you know, slow this thing down. It still took me a year and a half to sell off all the shit that I had from racing, right? And the bleeding, you know, you don't think about it, like even having an extra vehicle that's you're paying a registration and insurance for, right? And maintenance, you know, bleeding, cut the bleeding now, do the hard thing, have the conversation, come out the other side better than before, and you won't regret it. Okay. But look, business is hard. And I say, you know, it's one of the things that Raquel said to me, listening to some of the back shows. She heard me talk about how hard business is. Business is not easy. It's fucking hard, right? But the rewards of that and the rewards of getting through those hard things is where the value comes in, where the success comes in, and it gives you the ability to go back and look at it and say, wow, we overcame that. Right now we're this much better. Okay. Exactly. So the conversation that you're more than likely going to have, I'm guessing, is not going to be easy. But when you get over the hard stuff, your business has a better foundation and more longevity to it. Right. And so, you know, again, going back to, we got a few on the call that are starting a business. Going back to the founding elements, have the hard conversations, do the hard work now. It'll be easier down the road. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm gonna jump in one last time on this, and the rub that you're having with family members, and I don't need a bunch of details here. I just want you to think about this. Are those rubs business related? Is it something they're doing different in the business that you don't want doing, or is it personal stuff? And that's, you know, separate the family from the business rub. That's the first thing I'd say, because if the rub is personal, if it's family personal, attitude, lackadaisical, you know, not doing things the way you want. If it's personal, you've got a personal issue, and I wouldn't resolve it from a business standpoint. That might be counseling even. Keep it separate from the business, but it's going to affect the business. And this is where Jim is 100% right with the stop the bleeding. My wife has always said, the worst part is thinking about it. Doing it is easier than thinking about it, because thinking about it, you've got a million scenarios. It can go a million different directions, and you're going to think about it until you finally do something about it. So whether that's sit down with the founding documents again, or having the family business meeting and keeping it business, or going to a counseling session, doing something will help this go to that next step, wherever that happens to be. And maybe you won't even be the one making the choice. Maybe it'll be them making a choice. So, you know, just think about that a little bit when you're wrestling with this.
Yeah. And to Rod's point on that, Fred, and for anybody else, you know, I was with a very successful entrepreneur a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about brain capacity of all things. Right. And I said, hey, I'm a lot like you. I like to be in charge. I like to run the show, this and that. And I said, you know, I'm the president of our HOA. I said, I just feel like it's a distraction. He says, Jim, never volunteer for the HOA. Don't be the leader. Be the squeaky wheel that complains and gets shit done over there. And he says, the issue with that is the mental capacity that you allocate towards that extra duty takes you away from something else more important that you should be doing, right? So I came home from that trip and I literally put in my resignation letter within 24 hours and made my resignation effective August 1st, right? Thank God, by the way, our water pump went out a couple of days ago and the new president's been dealing with it for the last 48 hours. But Fred, what you're talking about, and this goes across the board for people in business, when you have something that is distracting your brain capacity from positive things that are moving your business in a forward direction, you got to eliminate that. Because if you let it fester for too long, now all of a sudden your mind is focused on that instead of how do I make more money, gain more clients, more customers, succeed, enjoy my family, all these other things, because you've got this nagging thing in your mind. So it just goes back to cut the bleeding, do it now, have the tough conversation, get past it, and free up some extra space. So anyways, that's good advice for everybody. If you got something that's utilizing brain capacity that's not positive, get rid of it. Put your ego aside. For me, it's like, okay, well, I'm the president of HOA. Let me put that aside. I don't need that ego stroke, or I don't need that role, that controlling factor. And by the way, the relief I felt after they received my letter and acknowledged it was way more than I ever thought I would feel. Like, wow, that's a burden I don't have to think about anymore. So anyways, those are my closing thoughts.
I've got closing thoughts for you.
Yeah.
This is so appropriate. Next week, Jim Riley has the floor, and his lesson, the core area is train, and you'll never believe what is on the agenda: conflict management. That's up next week, guys. So this teed it up perfect.
Right
Thank
on.
you all very much. I appreciate every one of you, and reach out if you need something. Thanks.
Rod.
All right. Thanks, guys.